All right, we're live, possibly. So if you can hear and see me, please let me know in the chat. And if not, that would also be good to know. But welcome to another Monday night live stream where we have a special guest tonight. We have Chris from Regular Guy Training LLC. So what we're trying to do tonight is discuss a few different topics, especially related to his expertise, which if you're not aware of Regular Guy Training LLC, the YouTube channel, please check it out. And if we have any mods in the chat, make sure you guys are sharing that link tonight. And I'll go ahead and make sure to pop it in here as well really quickly. And basically, we're going to go through some concepts and information that I requested from Chris to kind of give everybody some ideas about gear expectations, training standards, common misconceptions, and things along those lines. And then there will be time as well for a Q&A, so that way we can, answer some questions from somebody with the level of expertise that Chris has, which I certainly do not. So thanks for hanging out, Chris. Thanks for being here. And if you don't mind, would you go ahead and introduce yourself so everybody can get an idea of like who you are and what you do?
Yeah. Well, I'm Chris. I do the YouTube thing, Regular Guy Training LLC. Really more in the last year or so. I've been on YouTube since 2012. So been doing that for a minute and a quarter. And realistically speaking, started to actually care about it in the last 12-ish months or so.
I can kind of see that, yeah.
Yeah, right. Because if you've been paying attention, you've noticed the uptick in everything, right? More than that, though, in a few months here, we're coming up on 9 years of me running a schoolhouse. And the schoolhouse itself it's more like just a fighting gym, but guns, right? To where I'm not trying to sell you on stuff I used to do or try to write books and exaggerate experience and that sort of stuff. Today actually is the anniversary, my 17th anniversary in the Army. I'm a reservist, 12 Bravo, okay, or a combat engineer. Literally nothing special. And as far as engineers go, actually literally no one cares about this MOS. Like zero people care about what the term route clearance means or conventional combat engineer stuff, because we kind of sort of get in everybody's way for the most part, break too much stuff for maintenance, steal stuff from supply, go too slow for the infantry kind of stuff. So, but way more than that though, like my day-to-day is teaching guys stuff what I know and revising things based off of things that you learn, right? Because good Lord, I look at the curriculum, almost 9 years ago now, and there's certainly things back then that I believed in wholeheartedly that were stupid, right? So
That's a
you
lot of us,
evolve.
I think.
Oh yeah, yeah. I was absolutely one of those. You shouldn't have too many lumens of white light in a house kind of people, as a for instance, all the way back then.
I carried a P320 appendix, so you're good.
No, I get it. But I'm still unreasonably attached to 1911s and 2011s, things like that. So, but other than that, it's I like to learn stuff. I like to share what I've learned. That's the cornerstone of that whole identity, I suppose, between the business and the YouTube stuff and everything else. That and just people that like to function off of status and titles kind of annoy me. Hence
Yeah,
the
I understand.
handle,
Okay,
So
so the company is Regular Guy Training, and the website's regularguy.training, correct?
correct.
Cool. And I'll go ahead and share that really quick just so everybody can see. And so Chris teaches classes and all kinds of stuff related to, firearms proficiency and things of that nature. So make sure you check that out if you're interested in getting some training, which is obviously the thing that most people tend to be lacking in because of the resources involved, whether or not it's, the cost of the training, the room and board and everything else required to travel. So, one of the things that we're going to talk about tonight is, standards of training, especially related to being on a budget, just because I think that's one of the more restrictive reasons for why people don't train to the level that they would like to.
Yeah.
So let's see here. Now, just so everybody knows, there will be some time for some Q&A towards the end of the chat, but we're going to try to keep things a little bit streamlined here in the beginning to stay on topic and whatnot. But obviously, if you have something you want to mention, just go ahead and throw it in the chat. Make sure you tag me in it just so I can see it. And we'll just kind of get started because personally, I watch your channel quite a bit, Chris. And the main reason is, for me, you bring a level of experience to the table that you don't generally see through YouTube. And that's somebody who has a really high round count on a lot of different platforms with a lot of different equipment and accessories and things. And you're not tied to anybody financially, or so it seems, right? And
I'm certainly no GBRS as a for instance, right?
Right, so. Right. So there is a level of transparency and honesty with your reviews that you don't always get from other channels. So I rely on it because I just recognize the fact that you have more experience and more of an ability to put the time in and the resources in to actually achieve that level of failure rate that a lot of people never actually, arrive at. So let's go ahead and just talk about the most common thing I'm sure you get asked quite a bit. But that's going to be reliable gear recommendations, right? Let's talk about some of the things that people may, have some like misconceptions about, or might just be mistaken on. And the first thing I want to ask you is, like, what's the most common denominator that you regularly encounter regarding gear failure? So we're talking about, would that be it being used improperly or being installed improperly, or is it because it's bad production quality, bad maintenance? What do you see the most that causes an equipment failure?
So, Jesus, this is the most gray question I've ever gotten. No, that's cool. It's cool though, right? Because if I were to sort that one out specifically, honestly, and it isn't necessarily really a no-no, because I actually kind of encourage people that, unless it's obviously like an upper level class that we're doing on like the private side or whatever, you really should do the experimental part, right? Where you put this build together, or you made the most not Glock ever, but because it is one, but it's Gen 3 compatible stuff from a million sources or whatever, right? So yeah, obviously we need to be able to evaluate this stuff, but they come out to us in part to evaluate. But a lot of times you see a lot of failures they weren't expecting. The biggest one that I see is blind brand loyalty. So great example of this, as a for instance, Sansa waterproof bag and just a handguard. Magpul has not put out anything good in 10 years. As a for instance, right? I actually don't think that's so bold, right? Because the Gen 3, the AR magazines with the tabs on them and that sort of thing, they came out, a little over a decade ago. Their AK stuff likes to fall off of AKs, as a for instance. Their bipod, they took, as a for instance, they took a recommendation to give me a little bit of movement in a bipod. They heard that and said, okay, I want it to feel like you're having a seizure with this bipod because it moves entirely too much for what it is. They sell gloves that no one cares about, right? Their AK magazines are a travesty on the human race. Their Glock magazines love to work great until you start to get any stuff in them whatsoever. And I love watching these things explode when it starts to rain. Not literally, but sometimes literally. Honestly, they're made of super soft materials anyway, but just as a for instance. So a million different examples of this, honestly, because we're bringing up because it's topical now, but Sig Sauer as a for instance, right? A lot of people just trusted the 320 because they own a 226 or a 229. We forgot that it was a 250 that had a striker shoved into it, and then nobody really paid much attention to it. It's kind of like just now that the Army is actually trying to put it through the testing that would have been required post the knockout phase, because there's 2 phases to that, right? And they're finding all kinds of problems. So instead of looking into things, a lot of guys will just be like, this brand made this, although I've never seen this product before, I'm just going to go look at it or get it, rather than seeing through some sort of evaluation or research that walks into it, and then it causes them problems later, right? Which is why, my initial review, as a for instance, was 6,000 rounds on a Trigicon RCR, but I'm not recommending that as like an all-time great yet.
Right.
Right. It made it through 6,000 rounds. Hooray. I've seen like 4. So I'm not going to take that next step. I'm going to wait years before, I thoroughly trust something. And yeah, I understand to a point, everything's a gamble, but you can see where I'm coming from on that too.
Yeah, well, I think it's something that I personally, I guess, have been learning the hard way as I go through the motions of trying out new equipment, trying out new gear, testing like the latest and greatest technology and things of that nature. Especially from the preparedness mindset, there's a lot of truth to relying on something that's proven and time tested just because those kinks have been worked out, or just because you have the data to actually work with.
Yeah.
It's like, I know you just recently started working with the Ruger RXM, and it sounds great on paper. Everybody's had a lot of good things to say about it. It has some interesting features, right? But how many years will it be until you can actually say it has the same track record as a legitimate factory Glock, right?
Well, as a rule, right, I don't do first impressions. And I know I annoy people when they ask me, and I'm just like, I'm not telling you, because unless it's truly, truly horrifically bad, everything's great at first. Everything looks awesome. Fit and finish is great. It's the meme, right? Mine's reliable. It's never been fired. As a for instance, at present, I have like 2,000 rounds through this gun. I don't know anything about it yet. I have no idea what's going on with this thing, right? Like, so because in the modern day, especially something that's based off of a 40-year-old design, okay, yeah, so you shot 2,000 rounds, right? So,
well, and that actually leads me to an interesting question, because I would say 10 years ago, if someone said they had 2,000 rounds through their pistol, as like a novice shooter, I would have been like, yeah, right. Because for me, when I first started shooting, I lived in California for one, so that was an issue. But I would go to the range, buy a box of ammo, shoot the gun, shoot some holes in some paper, and be like, man, that was a great day, And that is, you'd have to do that 40 times to get to 2,000 rounds, right? So at what point did you recognize that there was like a level of round count investment required to actually reach that point of having a well-rounded opinion? And when did you start to kind of like understand that those lower round count thought processes weren't really, applying any value?
this is great, right? Because it involves a Mini 14 and nothing fancy.
All right, I like this.
No
already.
joke. No joke. I went through 3 of these rifles and way too much patience and a bunch of Tapco mags, as a for instance.
Oh.
Yeah. Because Tapco, Pro Mag, and Ruger, I believe, made magazines for this rifle, and this is going back pretty far. I might be misremembering something. But it was the Ruger Tactical, not the ranch rifle. So it was the one that had the thicker barrel. I put an Accu strut, I think that's what they called, in it. I got the Archangel stock for it over time. Replaced. I ended up putting an Ultimac on it too, because Ultimac used to make one for those as well. I tried everything I could to make this a modern rifle, because dude was telling me that he shot thousands and thousands of rounds, and I never thought about never hearing the actual number, right? And I never thought too hard into thinking into him reviewing a gun he's never shot before, saying, I haven't shot this thing, but I know enough about guns just looking at it to tell you if it's good or not. I didn't think much about that, as a for instance.
Right.
At that time, people were laughing at the concept of putting 1,000 rounds on a review as a standard, because what are you going to do? Shoot 1,000 rounds through every gun that you buy? And this is like 2010, 2011 type stuff.
When I first started shooting, actually.
Right? And then when stuff started breaking all the time based off of recommendations that I was taking off of people like this, and some of this stuff actually like went to the field, right? And that's the part that like scares you. And nothing creates a change like when you piss somebody off. So that's where that starts.
Okay.
And so from the beginning, the first thought I had was, well, if I'm going to do this YouTube thing, minimum is 1,000 rounds. And then looking back on it, it's like, good Lord, it's literally nothing, right? Because back then, like 10-8 performance, Raven concealment Phantom 2s were a big deal. Single stack 1911s and 45 were what everyone brought to a class. It was like well over 80% of the guns, right?
That was the top of the competition line back then.
Brass bead fronts or front sights are a big deal then, right? So, everyone is just now starting to dog on a Serpa holster. So there's a lot of stuff that we moved from since then. And then you just sort of figure out, it's like the higher the round count, obviously the more that you learn. And it's not what I'm hearing from all of these guys on the internet right now that just say that if you shoot a certain number of rounds in a review, your gun's going to come apart, as a for instance, right? If I shoot tons of steel cased ammo through my handguns and rifles, they're not going to disintegrate. At this point, I've probably shot a full Connex container's worth of steel cased like Tula, Wolf, things like that through my guns. And then you start realizing, just overall, it's like a lot of these people talking at cameras have not taken the time to verify a lot of things that they say. So, and a lot of these guys are functioning off of prior military experience. So they're trying to sell you on things that they used to do. And that sort of pushed me into action for the most part.
Yeah. No, it makes a lot of sense. And, I think starting to learn that and understand more about it has kind of pushed me to be more critical about things, which is why if something stops working properly right in the beginning, I lose a lot of patience because we're already here. You know what I mean? So like we're already at the point where I've lost confidence and things aren't working the way they're supposed to. How much am I willing to invest to keep pushing forward to find out how much more broken this item can become, right?
Well, and what I figure out too is, right, I shoot a considerable amount individually, but far more Eclipse than me. Year on year, we go back like the last 3.5-ish years or so. I see between like 450 and 550 students a year, right? Like just as an average. So you go right in the middle of that. It's 500. Each one of those guys shoots on average 2,000-ish round plus a little bit rounds per individual, right? So just on that math, it's over 1 million rounds witnessed a year, right? So what at least I learned really fast is what to have really no patience on whatsoever, but also I don't care about lots of stuff too, right? Like as a, for instance, how many times have either you read in a magazine or watched in a video now where some guy says, the trigger leaves a lot to be desired and pick a handgun. And good God, that does not really matter all that much these days. Right, like just as a for instance, there's lots of people that'll say, there's a lot to be desired from a Gen 5 stock Glock. What are you really looking for? Right, it's 5.5 pounds after you get the little bit of air out of it, get to the wall and press through it. That's a 1/4 inch. What do you really want, man?
And
right?
It's reliable and safe to the degree that it can be while still maintaining a decent trigger pull, right?
Yeah, I mean, like you can hatchet the thing as hard and as far as you can onto concrete, and it's not firing. What honestly do you want? And then like post 5, 6, 7,000 rounds to all of the little steps, right? The little crickety things that are in that trigger press are basically gone now. So like, so it's things like that I start to just not. I really don't care about if there's a little bit of fisheye, I suppose, or whatever, as a for instance, in some pistol dot, because well, if I'm noticing the glass, I'm not using it correctly anyway, as a for
Right.
instance, right? So, like, at least to me, far more than things that I'm super duper critical of, although I do have those things like anybody else. I notice that I don't care about way more things with the more experience that I gain in this.
Well, and I think that's a learned concept, right? The more you experience, the more you practice, the more you shoot, the more you use your gear, the more you realize what you don't need, regardless of what it is, right? So the same could be applied for what you carry in your backpack or what you have in your chest rig or whatever it is, because if you open that pouch and you've never used the item inside, why are you carrying it, right? So you stop caring about a lot of things. And like you said, that's more conceptual related to things like fisheye or nitpicking about little things that don't actually matter. But I think it is something that is really just evasive, because they'll come in and they'll buy a Glock and they won't even shoot, and the first thing they do is change out the trigger, right? Because they've heard how bad the Glock trigger is, so they need to change it out because it's bad. So they're going to go out and do that. Now they're messing around with the reliability and the tolerances of the firearm because someone told them it was a bad trigger and they haven't even really tried it.
In a lot of cases, they're goofing with how safe it can be too, right?
Yeah.
Because these guys are plugging triggers in and they're not checking a cruciform, as a for instance.
Right.
Right. Like if they don't even know what a cruciform is, what are you doing paying $1 bajillion for a trigger, whatever that cost is? And this is really, I say this a lot to students. Your experience should inform your decision making on stuff like this, right?
Yeah.
Because as a for instance, I learned over time, this secret to most Glock triggers and what makes them feel nice, like 80%, I would say, is if your striker spring is minus a couple of coils, right? Like that reduced power, whatever the wording is, striker spring, that's like most of what makes it feel nice, right? Like it just as a for instance, a buddy of mine, we're sort of dual evaluating this because he's a dork too, but he picked up an RXM at the same time that I did. And we decided, okay, well, let's see exactly how Gen 3 Glock E it is, right? Because I noticed that a lot of people are avoiding that part for part comparison, but we're not because we're dorks. And in the middle of all this, we got to that point where it's like, hey, let's just throw that reduced power striker spring in there. It's like, and he starts pressing a trigger on this thing. I'm on the phone with him, and he's like, dude, this is a skimmer now. Like, just as a for instance, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, trigger shoes. Okay, I got it. You can use the trigger shoe that you want or the trigger bow that you want, but also everybody listening gets my point too.
Yeah.
So it's like you don't learn that without spending like $4,000 total on different triggers, just gooning it up and then just shooting a lot of bullets and figuring out most of that doesn't matter all that much.
Yeah. No, it makes a lot of sense, and I think that it's kind of like a priority thing, right? Like, so why are we focusing on this really small amount of minutia when if you just shoot more, it's going to make a bigger difference than, like you said, changing a trigger or something along those lines. So
you got a lot of clowns in this chat, I see.
Oh, I do, huh?
Uh-huh.
Those are the right kind of people, I guess, right?
I noticed some of these guys. They're throwing money at you to clown me now too.
Okay, let's see here.
Can you please remind him of PSA dagger supremacy? I got a particular question about a shotgun that I'm not going to answer because we already talked about that. That was great.
Well, I will say, Silent Guard and Savage Lee, thanks for signing up for YouTube memberships. I do appreciate that. Avocado Atrocity says, can you please remind him of PSA Dagger Supremacy, which I have to feel is like some level of trolling. But look, I've owned PSA Daggers. I've shot them. They worked, but they're not. I haven't pushed them to the limit where I would be confident in recommending them. So, and what I did is I buried one. So underground, it seems to be working really well, actually.
Yeah, what he's making reference to is my review on one because I took a stock configuration one to about 6,000 rounds, We tried to put a different trigger in it. That didn't work. So we went back to the stock components. And then when we did, it decided to turn to a Glock 18 on us.
Interesting.
So yeah, that's what he's clowning on purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah. Plus I remember avocado in my comment section because that's,
well, we got to have some of these people here to keep things interesting, you know?
Oh yeah.
But yeah, thanks for that. And, Silent Guard, not everybody has random white hair like I do. So I apologize that we couldn't get coordinated on that for you. So
see, the camera isn't picking it up, right? But there are a few of them in there. Okay.
Yeah, see,
you know,
I'm turning
35 this year. So
okay, right. So I'm only a few years older than you. But you know, my white streak is very prominent. It becomes a problem for me on a regular basis. So because clearly I did it on purpose in order to get some kind of anime clout or something. So
it looks very current age.
Yeah.
I suppose, right?
Yeah,
so.
which is just wonderful for me, especially when the gas station clerk is like, "Hey, what's up with that, man?" I'm like, "I just want to buy some beer, man," you know. So let's see, just to kind of go through this motion, which I know is something that people are kind of expecting and always want to hear from people with experience. But do you have baseline recommendations of certain equipment categories, like do you have if someone had nothing right now and they're like, "Hey, you know, like, can you recommend a pistol manufacturer or an optic manufacturer?" Like, is there any? Because like recently, I know you recommended Streamlight or Surefire for weapon-mounted lights,
Yep.
at least for the TLR1 and the X300. So, like, do you have any other suggestions along those lines of things you feel like you could trust? I guess.
So it all goes in stages, right? And I think in one form or fashion, most of us go through these stages, especially once you start to train a lot, right? And I'm speaking from the side of the house that puts much greater emphasis on training than prepping. And I recognize that you have a lot of more prepping focused folks in your audience. So understanding that though, right? Usually it goes through stages, and the way that I recommend that most people go through is get the most important stuff first and then figure out what's going to be needed afterwards. So as a for instance, whether or not we realize it and all of that, but I think it's not a stretch to say that if you were to pick a primary weapon system, and yeah, no one likes that term anymore, but it is more or less a system because things have to revolve around it. But if you were to more or less pick a primary weapon system, right, that's a handgun. You know, day-to-day life, regardless of job, your primary weapon system is a handgun, right?
Yep.
And it's likely concealed. So where I would suggest that somebody leads off on this whole thing, whether they've been shooting in the past or they don't know anything about anything and they just want to come out and take a class from us, and people do that, right? Where we receive people that have never drawn a handgun from a holster in their lives, and so like they show up with stuff in packages still. And it's like, okay, well, we can help get you sorted out and all that stuff, right? But I would say if you were to just get started, and this might catch a little bit of new age flack, but I think my reasoning is sound on this, is, you know, get a handgun, and that handgun likely should, at least to me, be either a Glock 19 or an M&P 2.0, right? The Glock 19 for obvious reasons. The ecosystem is enormous, and lots of people sleep on the 2.0. And I personally do not mainline the things because I have 4 billion Glock magazines, as a for instance. But you know, there's something to be said about it passing like every really, really stupid weather test that people admit are stupid ever. There's something to be said about a handgun that routinely does that, right?
Right.
And it's the first time in a really long time that Americans have made a solid handgun. You know, hot take. The 1911 was the last actually good auto-loading handgun Americans have ever made, in my personal estimation, before the M&P or the "we're going to sue you" version of the Glock made by Smith & Wesson.
The Sigma.
Right? The Sigma, yeah, there you go, right? A slightly worse Glock that they sued them over, and then the M&P got made, right? So, but still, right? You start there. And I actually, if you're brand new and you don't even know how this stuff sits on a belt yet, right? Probably first stop shop is if you know somebody with an appendix holster, try that on. But if you don't, try a strong side first because you'll at least carry the thing around, right? Because it's slightly less of a pain to learn that you should probably put your shoes on first.
Yeah.
Right. And that's like the magazines you have came in the box kind of first step, right? And then we start to get oriented with it because you're going to image train. The internet exists, right? So you see more or less what these other guys are doing. But I would caution you before to not start just bolting things to the gun yet. You know, shoot the gun, figure out how this feels when it's recoiling versus what these randos are saying how it feels in the hand, because how it feels in the hand static means about nothing, right? So shoot this thing and figure out what recoil impulse feels like for the first time. Okay, then a strong side holster if you're going to carry the thing. Okay, great. And then after that, like from there, I would say personally, buy a couple of magazines and find a place to go train, whether it's a schoolhouse or just a beginner's lesson or that sort of thing. Yeah, it's kind of hard to vet because there isn't like, man, much like martial arts, there's a lot of mystic woo out there, and the internet has culled a bunch of it, but a lot of it still exists. But even still, a good starting point that's safe is a good starting point. And then we can start informing our decision making on, okay, my belt needs to get better. I'm more confident in what holster I should really be buying, right? I'm more confident in where I should start with a white light, right? Because brand new guy sees a Surefire X300 friggin' turbo or whatever, and that's steep. And I get that, right? And really, the size of that light is daunting to brand new people. So once you start to get some reps under a good trainer, that is where we start making further choices. That's where we figure out, especially if you go to good places, that's where we figure out that night sights are mostly dumb, right? Because if you have a solid white light, you don't see them, and that's that, really, right?
Yeah.
So
you need to see what you're shooting at, so you'll see your sights.
exactly. And then once we start to get there, okay, you start building proficiency on that side of the house, and enough to figure out that handguns are awful at about everything but the concealment part, right? So then once we make those realizations, okay, so now it's time to buy a rifle, right? Same process. You pick up your basic rifle and that sort of thing, and a really good just like first stop. Don't screw around with it. Just a first good stop. Just go to BCM as a for instance. Are they the best things ever? No, that's not the point. You know, you don't have to worry about also then learning how an AR is assembled, right? So don't start with a PSA. You experiment all of your dumb ideas with PSA because the stuff you get from there is cheap, right? Like if you just start with a BCM, it's more likely, I got it, stuff is made on Monday and Friday, right? Just start with the BCM, and if the thing comes with a set of irons, great. If not, start there, right? By this point, we more or less figure out a little bit more about the white light stuff. Start there, great. And by now, this is some time at this point, right? We figured out more or less what sort of sighting system we want to put on it, because it's likely that like individuals are very intelligent, right? Dude figures this is more than likely just a home defense implement at present. Okay, so we're going to get a red dot from somewhere that isn't going to rip your arm off if you go buy it. And then same thing, seek a trainer, make experienced decision making, things like that. And then that's when we start talking about gear. And that's when we start talking about what enhances that performance and what actually matters versus what doesn't. You know, and then more things follow on after that. But, you know, starting with a handgun, get trained, you know, make the little upgrades that you want, rifle next, same process. and then training
Okay.
methodologies and all that stuff usually follow. So yeah,
I mean,
the most it's a non-answer answer ever, right? Because it's super gray, but
yeah, but it's reasonable, it's well thought out, and it is what makes a lot of sense because especially with the handgun first, I've always recommended that as well because it's what you're likely to have on you. But it's also harder to learn, right? So, and I'll also say that I'm guilty of strapping all the stuff to my gun before really testing it, and then realizing the gun doesn't work right, and now I've got like an optic on it and a light on it and all this stuff, and I'm like, oops, I just wasted a lot of time and energy and effort on a gun that's not working properly yet. So I really like the advice of getting the gun and just shooting it and getting training and stuff before adding all the accoutrements, right? Because we want to make sure that things are tip top, they're working properly, and that you, like you said, you're comfortable with the gun as well. Because there is
right.
a point where you might decide it's not really the right gun for you, and why did you waste all that time and money and effort to get all the stuff for it then, right?
And here's a wild thing about this too. What usually follows this, right, is okay. So I've taken the steps. I have the stuff. I went and I got the advice from the trainer and that sort of stuff, right? Usually the next question is, well, what's the training methodology afterwards, right? So that's a whole thing with us. Like, I believe that if a trainer is worth his salt, he's going to give you a whole bunch of tools. Because here's the reality of taking classes with people: 1 day, 2 day, 3 day, whatever. If that trainer is worth his salt, the following is going to happen: all the rust is going to be knocked off. You're going to be super sharp because you got a million reps on a bunch of stuff. And you also should have a giant grocery list of things you should work on, right? And then tools to do that with. That's the
Right.
point of that class, right? In 1 or 2 or 3 days, yeah, you could genuinely think that you got better, right? And there might be a little bit of marginal quantifiable improvement, but that's not the point. The point is to give that person all of this homework to do and then go do it at the house,
Yeah.
right? So what I tell guys all the time is, and with present, like right now, this second type pricing, right? This works out to roughly $50 a week or biweekly. And what I tell them is, okay, once we've made all those decisions for the handgun stuff, you really should have a couple of things. And one, that's your primary handgun. And second, you should probably have a 22 caliber handgun too, right? Because dry fire, you can do tons with it. It's not just, how fast can I draw and how fast can I reload, although that is part of it, right? Well, I guess I should back up and start with that too, right? If we're doing all this, we should be gymming and that sort of stuff too, right? So how I do this is it's not a lot. It's 10 minutes worth of dry fire on pick a concept as the demon soup is hitting the bloodstream, and right when my skin starts to crawl around, okay, great, I'm out the door and I can go handle all those things. But if you're on a budget, especially, what it turns into is 100 rounds of 9mm a week in conjunction with 500 rounds of 22 a week, right? Present day pricing, if you're looking at online stuff, it averages out to around about $50 a week, right? So just deleting some fast food, which you should anyway, because you should anyway, right, is honestly pretty easy to do. We live in a first world country. $50 is pretty easy to find for the most part, right? Because if $50 is hard to find, we shouldn't even be talking about all this in the first place. But okay, great. So with the 100 rounds of 9mm and 500 rounds of 22, you really should pick a couple of concepts and the connective tissue before that, right? So you lead off with your 20 rounds of 9mm on that particular concept, whatever it is that you've chosen to work on, right? Because you could do 500 rounds worth of reloads today, sure. Whatever hurts you the most right now, one-handed stuff, pick a thing. And then you spend 500 rounds at double the distance refining it, right? So for instance, Glock 44 is a great training tool. If you're using like 1,200 feet per second, gold dot, whatever that manufacturer is, I forget. You can get like a 6,000 round brick of it for like $300 ish, right? So, okay, great. It's sub 1 pound loaded, and it still has a 5.5 pound trigger in it. So if you start at 25 yards with your 9mm handgun and then back up to 50, if you don't think you'll be humbled instantly by that little 22, I don't know what to tell you, because you just haven't done it at this point, right? You know, trying to shoot like an A zone size plate at 50 with a 22 that's set up just like that. You know, you got a friggin' light on it or whatever. Like, there are genuinely people on the planet that just think that the sights that it comes with are just off out the gate, and they're not. You're just bad right now, you know, and you're pushing the gun too hard because the trigger's 5.5 pounds and the gun is under a pound loaded, right? So those 500 and then those 80 rounds of 9mm, so you never truly get too used to that 500 rounds of 22 impulse. And we have a good endpoint, a good period on the sentence of that concept, because you more or less proof it now with that 80 rounds of 9mm. So between the 10 minutes of dry fire and then that a week or bi-weekly, depending on your budget, it's really hard to be bad at that point, right? Because you have tools and now I have methods to work through it.
Yeah. No, I've always liked the idea of a 22 long rifle analog of your main duty pistol, which is why it's nice that, you know, the Glock 44 exists, and most of the other major brands have a similar pistol of some kind. There's an M&P as well. But that's an interesting take, and honestly not one I've heard before. So I think that's actually something worth exploring, because that is it gets you a lot of reps, but without breaking the bank. And then, like you said, it kind of shows you where you're at when you're anticipating that 9mm recoil while holding onto a 22 that's under a pound. It does make a significant difference and forces you to have a little bit more marksmanship, right?
Well, and even if it is a little bit, the one thing, a little bit meaning a 22, the one thing you can't get in dry fire is recoil impulse.
Right. Right.
You know, even if it's pneumatic or whatever, you know, it's not the same.
Yeah. No, that's true. I did get a super chat to come in, and it is from Alabama Mouse Boy saying, "You guys are great. Been listening since 2017. What's your opinions on two-piece case 5.56 ammunition, i.e. Phantom Defense?" And I'll send this to you, Chris, just because I don't really have any information on that. I've not really looked into it at all. All I know is that the new, 6.8 by 51 is a two-piece case as well. So I assume they're trying to push maybe some higher pressures out of it, but I don't really have enough information on it to have an opinion.
So as far as 5.56 stuff goes, what I believe he's talking about, because I have a little bit of insight on this, is, new loadings for 5.56 that are like turbo fast, right? Like out of a 10.5, you're getting like 3,000 feet per second out of it plus, which is Jesus speed, but it's also Jesus pressure too, right?
Right.
So, I mean, 5.56 rifles are already high pressure designed rifles, right? But when you increase pressures on it and that sort of stuff, and I hope I'm going off of on a tangent on this, on what I believe this actually is, versus guy comes back with, that's not what I was talking about at all. But, but yeah, I mean, just as a, for instance, for longevity of the parts, you probably don't want to fire 50,000 rounds of Mark 262 ever, as a for instance, right? Because just the higher pressures alone will beat the brakes off of half your parts, right? Can the gun handle it? Sure. Is the effect on target amazing? Great, right? And as far as 5.56 guns from reputable companies, and that's a two-step process, right? Sure is my answer, right? Okay, yeah, cool. Is it all that much better than, for instance, Mark 262 that just disintegrates itself when it touches things because it's an OTM going fast, even out of a 10.5 or whatever? I don't know. What I will say, though, is you better have a really solid gun for that, right? You better be ready to go as far as all of your stuff being properly pressurized for that system. And if it's that short, technically it's kind of not really. But this is acknowledging it's really, really hot stuff, right? So you need to pay attention to, okay, well, if it's the defense stuff, okay, what's that POI shift even up close? Things like that. And on the, and before somebody asks, concepts like this for the spear, like this is a really, really great idea in concept, right? I could even see the spear as a solid, like 110-esque rifle, right? Although the 110A1 is just better in every conceivable way immediately, like without even looking hard. But, you know, the general use, the spear is hot garbage. It really is.
It's
Because
pretty heavy.
plus I have more than a little experience with it too, on both sides of the house, as far as like military stuff and not military stuff, if I'm making a lot of sense.
Yeah,
Right.
we're tracking.
It's before somebody asks, I'll just give the answer. It's going nowhere. This is the M8 all over again.
Yeah,
They're gonna put it on posters. Guys will start using them, and they're gonna be like, "Yeah, this is it," and then it'll just quietly disappear. Right, regardless of how many are actually bought.
yeah. I actually have one, and it's in 7.62, and it's fun to shoot, and I enjoy it. But I can see, like, immediately if I had to grab a rifle out of the safe, I'm grabbing the AR instead because of just weight. Like at the very minimum, just for weight, you know.
Yeah.
So let's see here. I don't know if we really answered your question, Alabama Mouse Boy, but I appreciate the super chat, and hopefully you at least got some insight there. Because I like if I had to just throw something out there, it would be that your standard 5.56 loadings are already a rifle cartridge, and if you're shooting that at a target that needs to go away, it's going to likely do the job you need it to do, especially from like a prepared civilian standpoint, right? So
Yeah.
adding extra sauce doesn't necessarily achieve the desired outcome. You know, it's just the same as if you were to use like a hot 10 millimeter bear load or a 9 millimeter defensive round. If it's against a soft target, you know, a two-legged target, there's not going to be a major difference besides possible over penetration, right? So at least that's my understanding.
Sorry, I had to mute myself because my dogs are bothering me. Nope, away.
That's all right. I've been waiting for my coonhound to start yowling from the other room. So whenever he thinks I'm talking to somebody else in here, it causes problems.
Yeah, I have a red tick that we named Copper because we're dorks, and a German Shepherd that they're young, so they're made out of solid rocket fuel. I'm amazed that they're this chill right now.
Well,
Yeah,
that's good.
because
That's good. We like the dogs around here. I got old dogs. They're causing me some issues lately by being old, but I can't really blame them for their age, you know. So let's see here. So there are a few other questions, but one thing I want to touch base on is I've heard people keep asking this over and over again, and they want to know what's going on with the P320. They want to know why you're not allowing it at your classes anymore, and honestly, like that's, you know, with everything that's going on right now, I can understand why, and you know, I'm curious as well. So would you mind just giving like a brief explanation, because you made a whole video about it, right, which people can easily check out. But
right.
what's your main, like the main reasoning behind it that pushed you to make that decision?
So Hasman the Great. It's not drama. It's not. At this point, it's enough suspicious activity to look out for the student base, right? Because there are enough mechanical safety problems to the point where this isn't just grainy footage from some cop's holster exploding. When you can, and I love the guys that are like, there's no proof. You can clearly see almost all of these guys not touching the guns, even if it's CCTV, right? You can see it happen. If your eyes work, this isn't debated anymore. The guns are just firing in holsters. Now, is that one per however many hundreds of thousands of units? Sure. Hooray. But a Taurus never did that. And I think Tauruses are hot garbage. The XDM never did that. And I hate those guns because their magazines are made out of coke metal. And so are the springs. You shouldn't fit 19 rounds in that magazine. So it's not just, but here's the thing though. It's not really just that either. Things I've actually witnessed is things like out of battery detonations. More than a few, really. You know, where,
It's
and most of the
dangerous.
time it's a real close call. And sometimes a guy gets sewed up afterwards. You know, so having seen enough of that nonsense, and then now I have to worry in the middle of, a private small unit tactics class that I'm teaching in the dark where there's a million moving parts. Is some guy's leg going to suddenly explode? Right? Just that image. There's plenty for me to worry about already. Never mind, I'm walking all over the place. I'm rotating between a bunch of different radios to make sure that everybody's where they need to be, or building actual like disposable buildings for guys to go through, things like that. I do not have enough. I do not have enough within me to care about the feelings that somebody's got on a thing they're emotionally invested in to risk themselves or other people while I'm putting on a class. That's the big thing about that. It's more than proven at this point, at least to me, right? Because enough. Here's a great example of this, right? World War II kicks off, and our Navy has a big problem. The Navy has a really big problem with torpedoes because torpedoes are not exploding. And the powers that be that are supposed to run the testing for said torpedoes haven't properly done any of this testing. They say it's too expensive, you see. And that the torpedoes work fine, you just need to shoot straight with your boats. This is the kind of stuff that we're hearing right now with Sig Sauer and the 320. Exactly the same. The only difference now is that there's more cameras.
Right.
Before it was just dudes writing stuff down. But the consequences for both of these are kind of friggin' huge. And more than one person has been put in the ground by their own gun at this point. I'm sorry. There's one confirmed case of this. Right. And that guy's carrying appendix, like a lot of us. So I kind of don't care how that makes somebody feel.
Right. Because
we have designs that we have followed for 40 plus years on this, or in some cases 100. And just as a for instance, none of these guns are perfect. Honestly, 1911s are not all that drop safe. Okay, those firing pins float about, right? And all of the custom ones that are based off of Series 70s are 100% not drop safe. But what they don't do is just fire in the holsters. And you don't have out of battery detonations. Both of those things will hurt a person whether or not they're doing something wrong. And I'm good.
Yeah.
You know.
No, I mean, that's reasonable. And it's something that I've actually asked recently to a local police officer. I asked him, so you guys are carrying P320s, and even if, like, let's just say there's actually, like, nothing wrong with the pistol at all. Even just the optics and the perception of the things that are wrong with it at this point, are you not opening yourselves up to additional liability just by carrying that pistol in comparison to something else that doesn't have that stigma around it? And of course, he was like, well, yeah. I mean,
and look, it's not
a choice, but I don't think it's a good idea.
And here's the other half of this, right? It's not the fact that this is happening, right? Nobody even remembers that there was a point in time where Toyota had a bunch of airbags just going off.
Yeah.
Okay. Nobody thinks that Toyota is a bad manufacturer of vehicles. No. Because the one time that they had a bunch of vehicles just had airbags go off in the middle of whatever, caused a bunch of problems, and I believe people died because of it, right? But what did they do? They immediately went, "That's not cool," and they fixed the problem.
Right.
Like you friggin' should. Right. If you are pretending to care about the lives of the people that you are actually putting at risk one way or another with your product. Right? Because whether or not we want to say that it is, the reality of the matter is the very second that you chamber a gun and put it on, it's dangerous time.
Yep.
One way or another, no matter how superior the safety system is, blah, 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 there is an element of risk no matter what. Same thing with driving a car, right? And now there are issues that are actually costing people. There's careers that have been ruined over this. At least one guy's been friggin' put in the dirt over this, right? And we're not the only thing that they have done over a decade is talk a bunch of trash to people, and issue a voluntary upgrade program.
Yeah.
Super sweet. Though that is the summary of the total actions taken by this company over 10 years. Sweet.
Yep.
Super sweet.
And it's super frustrating because so when I moved to North Dakota, the first gun I bought was a P320 because I wanted a concealed carry pistol because I finally lived somewhere where there was constitutional carry and everything else.
Yep.
And the guy at the shop, I didn't know as much as I needed to at the time, was just like, "This is brand new. It's awesome. The military's getting it, right?" So I was like, "Cool, sounds good, right?" And I've heard of Sig Sauer before, and it seemed like, okay, a reputable manufacturer, might as well give it a go. And then throughout the years, I've promoted P320 products and like done videos about them and all kinds of stuff because I enjoyed the pistol, I enjoyed shooting it, I
Sure.
liked the modularity and things of that nature. And at this point, there's just like almost a level of betrayal there that I've felt in the sense of like the lack of clarity, the lack of transparency, and the fact that if people, if even if none of it's true, then there needs to be a way to get out in front of it to show that something has changed or they've developed some sort of way to bring back confidence. But the one thing I don't want to be lacking confidence is in a pistol that I'm carrying on my person that's loaded, right? And I just decided I don't want to partake in that anymore. So I've made videos about my thoughts on like how to be as safe as possible with the guns, or like what some of my ideas about what could be happening were. But regardless, it's not confidence inspiring when the company still hasn't decided to do anything drastic or radical to ensure that people feel safe, regardless of whether or not the things are actually unsafe, right? And so I agree with you that the handling of the situation is almost the worst part of the whole scenario.
Well, replace the brand name with anybody, and we'd be lighting them on fire the same way.
Yeah.
Right. If Glock did this, if they were acting this way, just as a for instance, right, I would suddenly be a super duper M9 guy.
Yeah.
Right, because first of all, I like those pistols, which is why I'm getting ready to do an A4 after this RXM. But it would be the same for anybody. Like if the 320 really was the superior design, which it friggin' isn't.
Right.
Stop coping. It is not. But let's say that it was, and that Glock started doing the same exact thing as we are talking about right now. I would be looking at in New Hampshire's direction.
Right.
This isn't a fictional made up thing, and no matter what is said, it's not going to just go away, right?
No,
unless it is, unless you turn right at it and handle it, right? And a whole bunch of people get fired for because apparently I'm anti-gun, I'm anti-American too.
Engagement hacking grifter.
Sweet. Apparently I'm all those things. By telling people you are not allowed to carry an unsafe piece of equipment in classes because it's for you, it's for me, it's for them too. Yep. That's to your left and right. And as by the way, before the question comes up any further, the 365 was redesigned on purpose.
Yeah, I mean, I have to assume so.
Tinfoil hat time. It was redesigned on purpose. Now, its ability, just based off of the geometry of the parts and that sort of stuff, its ability to be drop safe and prevent out-of-battery detonations, it's a safe pistol to carry around, my estimation. But based off of what I've seen, both of those things, although significantly better to the point where they're still allowed in class for me, not as good. Not as good as they could be. And here's my thing. My standards don't just end at Glock either, right? Because they're actually probably the second safest pistol I've ever seen. The first, honestly, is the M9. Because there's like 800 things that need to move out of the way before the gun fires.
Yeah.
Right. So my standards don't just start and end at Glock, right? So is what it is, right?
Yeah. No, I get it, and so I just figured with the amount of interest in the chat that we needed to address it, right?
Yeah,
there's a lot of hype around the subject right now, and I get it because people just want to know, and it's reasonable to want to know,
Yeah, no, I get it. Like, I've never banned a product from my classes before. I've looked at things that people brought. Like, if somebody brings a Hellcat to class, I'm like, listen, do you have a second gun? Because I do, and you are probably going to use one of them, right? Because those things are routinely not that great. But what does it take then for me to be like, no, just don't at all, right? It has to be
Right.
something egregious, and that's just what it happens to be on this go.
Fair enough. We did get some super chats in that I want to address really quick. We got Airborne. Hold on. Airborne Veteran Random Stuff. So I just wanted to make sure to say that correctly. Medic Retired OEF 10, 11B, 173rd Airborne, Kunar Province. We appreciate your combat engineers when we understood the infinite loop of your job. So that's just a thank you from them for helping them out, I guess.
Look, man, just imagine having a headache for a year straight. The second the job starts, it just doesn't end, right? So thanks,
Awesome.
thanks, my guy.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. We also have Nick came in as well and said, can only pick one Glock 19 or Smith & Wesson M&P Sport 2 rifle. My opinion would be Glock 19 because I'll actually have it on me. That's what it comes down to.
Ditto. I can use one for the daily carry, and I can also use one for home defense, and that would be the Glock 19. Also, it's an infinitely better firearm.
I mean, we all know rifles are better.
Yeah, they're better at the ballistic stuff for sure, but I mean, and honestly, like, the quality of a Glock 19 is way higher than that of a Sport 2 in the first place. You know, that's not to say that it's an awful rifle, because it's not, for what it is, right?
Okay.
Well, it's no Olympian, right? If we put it in a rifle Olympics, it's not making the podium.
Right.
But if we put, same thing with the Glock, though, right? If that is an Olympian, right? So yeah, if you can only get one, it's a 19 all day, twice on Sunday.
Makes sense to me. Makes sense to me. And honestly, I've always advocated for a handgun just because of that reason. Your rifle doesn't matter if it's not with you, and that's all it comes down to. So
Yeah.
so let's see. I want to jump into we've barely gotten through some of these questionnaires already. All right, how are you doing on time? Are you going to be able to hang out for a little bit, or what's your plan here?
I'm good to hook here, man.
Okay, cool. I just want to make sure because things are flying by when it comes to the clock ticking. But this is something that you and I discussed, and I just want you to kind of throw it out there in the ether a little bit, just so people can digest it, because it's not what you usually hear, which might come from the side of not necessarily trying to sell things, but just trying to promote good practices. But the accessories that are overly hyped or possibly detrimental. I asked you about this one, and your response to me was suppressors. And it's a hard one to digest because, people will constantly tell you, like, signature, signature, signature. You don't want to have signature. And I understand it, and I enjoy shooting suppressed. I think it's more pleasant. But you have some reasons as to why you don't think that they're a requirement or even necessarily a good thing to have. So what would you like to tell everybody about that?
So look, here's my little tinfoil hat time on this, right? I think one of the biggest reasons why suppressors are fought for so hard, at least right now, well, it's starting to ease off just a little bit now, but there was a period of time where suppressors were required regardless of circumstance, according to the internet. I believe that the main reason for this is individual investment, because they suddenly got a little bit easier to get. And now there's a lot of them floating about. And that's the main reason, because I just had to go through all this effort to get this thing. How dare you tell me that I shouldn't use it? So that's, Mexican carry. Yeah. But so that's the one thing that's what I think is the real reason honestly. But if you think about the individual uses for these things, right? So again, I see a lot of bullets fired a year from a lot of different setups, and I do a bunch of shooting myself. So here's the deal. Generally speaking, if someone's going to get a suppressed rifle, for instance, right? Well, you know what? Let's address this because it's short. Suppressed handguns are typically friggin' dog water, right? Yeah, they'll run for a little bit. Yeah, and sometimes they'll run for a surprising amount, but you have to start doing things to the handgun in order to make them run for that surprising amount. And if you're running that handgun in a stock, well, in other words, in a I can shoot my defense loads good without the gun wanting to beat me to death or itself to death type configuration, and then yes, Nick, yes, they do in fact. This is a perfect segue in what I'm saying. If your gun is ready to run 124 or 147, as for instance, optimally, it's going to run like dog water with that can most of the time, right? It doesn't matter if you have a good suppressor host too. Eventually, the gun's going to stop, and way earlier than you thought it was, generally speaking. So that's short. I said it in a video prior to this already. Unless you got a friggin' barcode on the back of your neck too, or if you're just dealing with some coyote that you can see from your porch, what are you using a suppressed handgun for? Exactly.
Just for fun.
Exactly. Right. Is a valid enough reason to purchase something, but that's also not what we're talking about. So suppressors on rifles, especially presently. Now, this was way different during a decade ago, where it is significantly more valid than it is now. But with the modern era, with the technological leaps that everyone has gotten to, there is exactly one optimally good way to use a suppressor in like a two-way sense. So we're not talking about being polite while blamming pigs or whatever. And that is broad daylight, okay? Or if I'm trying to break contact on if I'm doing a long range reconnaissance mission, or if I'm trying to initiate an attack and I have a section that does that, and it's not like machine guns that are going to run into that either, probably, at least hopefully, right? Other than that, we start running this stuff at night, and you're visible from space in very short order, right? Because everybody's seen the friggin' popsicle at night, right? It is so much worse during the day, and thermals will pick you up in a heartbeat, right? So what's the point? They're going to see flash anyway, man. Just going to happen. And a really solid flash suppressor gets you by for most things, and being able to see you with that glowy junk, it takes way longer to do it, and it doesn't hang on to that heat either. And a light and a lamb and all this stuff out front of the gun. A lot of people on the interweb say that that's what ruins the mobility of the rifle. No, it's the can. It's the one extra pound on the very end of your friggin' rifle that does that.
Yeah.
Because my guy, I was there. I've done a lot of shooting with a light and a lamb on the gun. Is what is ruining the mobility of the rifle. It's the extra friggin' pound that took my super maneuverable 10.5-inch rifle and made it a 16-inch gun with a short rail on it now. Hooray. And in addition to this, if we're talking about internal piston ARs or legacy style ARs or whatever, this rifle just got way less reliable really fast. The compromise for that is a flow-through can, which is a really long way of saying a much worse can.
Yeah.
Right? That extends your Mark 18's reliability period from around 400 rounds before it tries to tell you, I'm not coming to work today, or I would like to leave work today. That extends it a further 200 rounds. Hooray. Or the bootleg carriers that, especially if you take it to a class, you figure it out really fast. This thing is constantly starved for gas. Because in a legacy gun, you get back pressure from two sources, and one of those sources is required to cycle the rifle, right? And of course, a lot of times you hear people that will come out and say, it's like, oh, mine has run like 1 billion rounds. Sweet. Okay, fine, whatever. first of all, it probably wasn't a legacy design anyway, right? This is when you start doing external pistons, and yeah, they run way better suppressed. But okay, if we can get a gun running reliably with it, great. Now I need like the logistics requirements versus the actual effect that it has. And I have to carry the thing. I have to make sure that I keep stuff away from it, and it's protected in some way, right? So just a random GP pouch where everything on planet Earth will get in there at one point or another. I probably have to specialize just a little bit for this, which is fine. But great, cool. I start training with this thing a lot. And now I start cycling through parts because my 800 something round per minute rifle is now 1,000 round per minute rifle, right? Or 900 and change, or whatever the new cyclic rate is. And I'm beating that thing to death. So like there's this whole cottage industry, at least to me, that is revolving around getting your rifle to run better suppressed. And God, it's annoying to me because we figured out how to make guns run reliably suppressed forever ago, and that was a 416 as a for instance.
Right.
You know, they might be kind of rude, but they run, and they'll run without 2 bolt lugs, frankly. Seen it. Right? Or what have you. We figured out how to make them run forever ago. It's the dorks that are trying to tune their guns perfectly so they get that perfect 3 o'clock ejection suppressed, not realizing the consequences of that.
Yeah, it hurts reliability overall, I would assume.
You know, and the guys that are trying really, really hard to just push like having the suppressor on the gun. For what? And most of the time it's just, you know, it goes back to my little conspiracy before, right? I just got this thing. I have to use it now.
Right.
And I seen one of the comments in here where somebody was just kind of like, it's nice to have, but it isn't necessarily a need. And I have to agree, honestly, because the more I do this, the less the can is on.
And it's, I mean, I experience it quite a bit where I actually like the impulse of shooting suppressed better. I don't know if it's just because of the sound signature or whatever it is, but also using a flow through can anyway. For some reason, I have a more pleasant experience with it. But when not running the can, I feel so much better about the gun, about the balance of it, the overall weight, the mobility, the heat, and everything else. Like it's just, it feels like I'm hurting myself just to have a little bit more enjoyment, I guess, or something, you know. So I understand signature reduction and everything as well. I don't know how important that will be. Like you said, I'm still going to provide a level of signature to a degree.
So here's exactly what it can give you if you run it in under optimal conditions, right? And that's like broad daylight. So you want minimal signature and that sort of thing because, you know, dudes can see during the day, right? So I want to kick up a bunch of junk and, you know, fut a bunch of dust. Although in certain environments it'll do that anyway. It just reduces it and sort of blast cans that stuff forward, the concussive junk. What it also does is, well, guns are loud, right? And the hardest part about figuring out, the hardest part about the initial stages of the whole trading really fast rocks things with people is, where's it coming from, right? And it's not because it makes a ninja sound. It's because the sound that's over there is way quieter than the supersonic stuff that's arriving right here. And for the context that you have, great advantage, right? Because all they're hearing is stuff that's arriving. And it takes them significantly longer to figure out where the other sound is coming from, right? Because it's still going to happen and you're noticeable. And from certain distances, you're hard to track, right? But even still, it takes them significantly longer to figure that out. That's the advantage. Full stop, right? Because once they figure out where it's coming from, they're just going to start hosing it that way, right? And okay, fight's on now, right? But that's the real advantage, period, right? Because at night, if anybody has optics of any sort, you're going to get found out immediately or consistently because now I have a glowy thing that's attached to me.
Right.
Right? The flash is just gonna happen because everybody has owl like imagery in front of their face,
Yep.
right? That amplifies literally all of that light. So it doesn't help you all that much in that regard. It just helps them tie things to you because now the flashy thing is now staying bright over time.
Yeah, it's
Right.
true. Because at least the flash signature of a flash hider just goes away immediately
Yeah.
once a round is spent. So
Yeah, and it takes quite a while to get nice and bright like that, right? Like thermals are going to pick you up for sure, but it's harder for night vision for sure to pick you up because it takes significantly longer to do that, and a significantly more intense volume of fire to do that too. So if you're forced into the situation in the first place, chances are I'm not worried about being all ninja stealthy and things like that, right? So what really is the advantage then at night? And this is to the point where I'm not the only person that thinks this, right? It's doctrine in some places to where you're taking the cans off at night because of modern optics.
yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, and honestly, that makes a lot of sense. I did see a question come in, or at least a statement that says cans have a purpose, dedicated home defense when you don't have time for ear protection. So for people like myself, I've never done anything professionally involving firearms. I've never been in a law enforcement position or in the military or anything like that. So I don't know, from your experience, like, is there any level of adrenaline where like the ear pro thing just doesn't matter during those situations, or how does that all play out?
okay, so unless you want to run like a really really expensive submachine gun caliber, which is basically 300 black sub, right? What you're likely going to end up with is a supersonic rifle.
Hmm.
People really don't get this. Cans in a house are horrifically loud if you don't have ear protection on. It's almost like not having ear protection because you start to suffer the same effects. And past a certain point, I still can't hear, right?
Yeah.
Now, I get it. The home defense thing, I'm not going to say it's the same. It's not. It's objectively not. But you still start to suffer from the same effects, especially if you're in a real enclosed space. You know,
Interesting.
well, it's supersonic crack in an enclosed space, right? These are still sound waves that have a chance to start rebounding off of stuff. And if we know how acoustics works, right, it can magnify itself based off of the surfaces it makes contact with. Never mind, also you're dealing with blast forces, which do the same thing.
Right. Okay.
What you get a little bit less of is concussion. It's still smoky and all of that stuff. Fine, whatever. A little less concussion. Great, cool. Still sucks, right? Now I'm not going to sit here and pretend like it's the same, but it's not as good as people think it is. Because
Right.
I've done that, right? Where I fired a Mark 18 size gun inside of a house. It sucks, dude. It sucks.
And
Right.
you're also getting rid of the whole reason of the Mark 18 to begin with, which is the additional mobility, right?
To a point, right? Well, because part of it was I can still can the thing and then have like an M4 size gun,
Right.
right? So, but yeah, making my 10-inch gun a 16-inch sized gun is not going to help lots of folks in their houses just looking at their living situation, right?
Yeah.
Because the only reason why you shouldn't barricade is if you got kids in the house. Now think about them corners you got to check. It probably is pretty butt because you got to do this weird T thing by yourself. Because if the lady is involved in your home defense plan, she's bunkering up by herself in a room because you're trying to limit risk, right? So now you are doing this by yourself. And if it's me, I kind of sort of really want a shorter gun for
Yeah.
that. Because this is going to be a traumatic event for everybody. Doesn't matter what I've got on the front end of this piece. This is going to be nice and traumatic for everybody, right?
Yeah.
So it the thoughts. I see this random comment in here, and it is relevant. Thoughts on how to take the edge off of cans is to remove the supersonic crack, right? So and now we're talking about shooting essentially a submachine gun in the house. minus the machine gun part. So if we're going to can it, the most logical thing in my eyes, if you're going to can it and you have to accept a long list of things walking into this, but a 300 makes more sense to me now in this particular capacity. Now, some guys can't just afford to run 300 like that, and I got that, dude. But at least for me, if it's a 5.56 rifle, you're accepting this is going to be super loud, one way or another. One way or another, it's going to be super loud.
Yeah, makes sense. And honestly, it's something I'm going to dive into more. But the pros and cons of a suppressor is definitely a topic that I'm going to play around with, just because that point of view that you expressed is, it's not exactly what everyone else is trying to push out there. So now I'm curious about how to analyze that for myself, right?
Well, so much like dedicated, thermally equipped upper receivers.
Yeah.
It is a very specific use case, and it kind of sort of sucks at everything else. But that one use case it's really friggin' good at it. Yeah. Right? So that all by itself justifies its existence. But it's way less necessary than I think it's made out to be.
Okay. No, that sounds right to me. I have already experienced the enhanced wear / need for maintenance, which does give me some questions, to consider, because I've had stoppages where the only reason I'm having stoppages is because of the increased fouling and how dirty things become so quickly that just wouldn't have happened otherwise. And especially in the extreme cold, it's caused me a lot of problems.
So there's ways to make this less annoying, right? Because, like, just as a for instance, been running my BRN4 upper for quite some time now, right? We're getting pretty close to 10,000 total rounds on it. I got like 6 to go before I release another video on it, because I'm not cleaning the thing up for like 10,000 straight rounds, right? So I do a lot of suppress shooting with this thing too, and the thought on it is when the can goes on, it doesn't come off for 1,000 rounds, just to evaluate it in that sense, right? Now, anybody watching this, compare your suppressed AR to what I am about to tell you. Imagine, right, you just fired 400 rounds suppressed, and the only lubrication that you added to the rifle was a couple of drops on your barrel extension because there's lubrication everywhere else. Right? Imagine firing 1,000 rounds suppressed, and you go to cycle your action, and it feels like you shot about 100 rounds of unsuppressed rifle, regular AR, because it glides in the same fashion, right? And I say that to say this: if you're gonna run suppressed, you with an AR or a 5.56 rifle, right? You may as well get the better friggin' can. Right? Because flow-through cans, by the way, in a house are the capital THE worst of the variety. They super suck to shoot indoors. So you might as well get the sealed can, right? So your RC2s and your Knightses and whatever you want to do. Your dead air, pick a thing. You might as well get it because it does its job actually good now. And if you're going to do that, you might as well put an external piston in there because you're getting back pressure anyway at all times. It's just more when you get the can on in the first place. You may as well have it come from one source, and you may as well not also have it come from what's required to cycle the rifle. Just on its face, and there's people that try to argue this. On its face, just think about that for 3 seconds. There's no way that running a can in an external piston rifle is not just a superior option. Right? Yeah. So if we're thinking about it in that context, and a lot of guys start thinking about the logistics of it and that sort of thing, and I got that, you got to buy parts. Right? But if you're talking to prepper folks, if they buy one thing, they buy 6 of that friggin' thing anyway, so I'm talking to right folks. If you're going to do all those things, that's the direction that I would go. Okay. Because if you don't have the specificity of this thing running, it's just sort of a crappy thing that you add to a rifle for a very specific purpose, and then you don't do that specific purpose all that good. So, and then of course you eat bolts.
Sounds right. I mean, I've ran multiple MCXs, and all of them have suppressed very well. and it's because it's a short stroke piston system, right?
Mhm.
So, and there's a noticeable difference when running that external piston when it comes to reliability and when it comes to heat mitigation, even and just everything, even just gas back to your face. It's definitely more pleasant, at least in my experience. So,
And I'll say this too: you don't need a $1,900 upper to do this, right? LWRC is fine, just fine. I've seen plenty of those guys with their external piston rifles come through class, suppressed the whole time, and they've performed well enough for me to cock an eyebrow at it, right? So you don't have to go with like a $1,900 upper, right? Because
right,
that's a BRN4 once you got a good handguard for it, right? Is you're probably getting close to $1,900 ish, like once you have the whole thing ready to go, right? With the muzzle
yeah,
device that you want on it, that sort of thing. Because it's like 11 or 1,200 for just the upper, and then you got to get a handguard and probably a solid muzzle device for it too, right? So we're probably spending a little bit of money at that point, right? And you don't necessarily, although it's nice, you don't necessarily need a PWS, right? Or a POF. Actually, don't buy a POF; those things suck. Or your MCX, that several MCXs that you've got, right? You don't necessarily need those things, right? Again, LWRC is very competitively priced, and they have no right to be as good as they are, but they are.
yeah. Well, LWRC is a pretty solid company for the most part too.
Yeah, yeah, they're pretty good
At least
about
from what I've
if
seen. Yeah.
stuff breaks, they'll get you fixed up too.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. I just wanted to kind of touch on that because it's not what you usually hear, which is why I like hearing it because it's coming from a place of experience. It's coming from a place of actual, personal use of these items rather than it just being theoretical. And I think that's why people, come to you for advice because that's generally what you put out, right? And if you go to Chris's channel, there's all types of videos where he explains his process of how I evaluate handguns or what round can I expect before wanting to do a review or all these things. So that way you at least have that data to reference regarding like what it is he's telling you based on what level of experience was required before that information was allowed to be put out. So I know I did a poll here in the chat earlier, and right now the poll is related to what have you spent more on this year. And I listed firearms, ammunition, training, and accessories. And unfortunately, training was the least amount. It was 11% of the poll. The number one was ammunition. So I think we're at least, in a better situation there for people, investing in trying to get out and shoot. But firearms was firearms was second place and accessories was third place. So I would assume training is where the money needs to go up a little bit. But you are a trainer. And so what I wanted to ask you was, what are your standards of training? Like, what advice do you have for people who just aren't able to get out and do it or just haven't been able to do it yet? Like, what's the bare minimum you would tell somebody they should try to, experience in order to get a little bit more proficient?
So if you were to stack that same poll, and that's why I'm shaking my head, if you were to stack that same poll to gun dudes at large, right? Like if there was just a way that you could post this in front of every gun dude on earth, right? They're gonna list ammunition as the number one thing. No, it's not.
Okay.
No, it's friggin' not. They buy this stuff, like the guns, the accessories, and that sort of stuff. And I'm not saying that your guys specifically do this. I'm saying like as a whole, people buy the things, right? The number of guys that have come out to class and that sort of stuff that have like 30 guns, as a for instance, and then they start coming to us, and then we start giving them a training regimen, and then they start figuring out some certain stuff, and then they go from 30 guns to like 6 guns, right? And they're all backups of each other, right? And that is when that ammo thing is now the truth. And again, I'm not saying that your poll specifically because you're asking your dudes, but I would say as a whole, people don't spend friggin' money on ammo. No, they don't.
Yeah.
The only time they spend money on ammo is when the wrong politician gets put into office, and now I have to sit here and look at friggin' 9mm target that looks like it's $1 a round at present, right?
Yep.
Like That's the only time that they spend the money on the ammunition. And the training bit, I totally get, right? Because anytime that I post a video that's training oriented, it catches like 12 views. It feels like,
Yeah.
right? So specifically, and I'm sorry, I went a little rant here. Specifically, what was your question?
Well, it was just more, what advice can you give to people who lack the training? Like, for example, Hazmat the Great just commented that they don't really have trainers in their area, a bunch of licensed to carry instructors, but not real training. And obviously, one of the barriers to entry is like the cost, not just the course, but travel and everything else related to what people would have to do to, like, for say, go train with you. So for the people who have limited experience with training or just aren't in a position to necessarily acquire it, what's like the bare minimum you would, I guess, advise people to try to acquire? Like, where should they start when it comes to just basic training in order to get a little bit more proficient, more comfortable, and to develop those more informed opinions?
So I'm going to target us and say, us meaning you and I, and say the very last place that you should look for training advice is friggin' YouTube. Okay.
Fair enough.
And I say this guy that runs a training company, right?
Yeah.
And the reason why I say this is, oh my God, as a whole, gun guy influencers are the perfectest examples of people that have entirely too much confidence. Okay. These are the same guys, the same reviewers that say things like installation of the Trijicon RCR is a pain. How? Explain that to me. As a for instance,
reasonable to install to me, but
here's what I mean by this, right? If you're limited on sources for trainers and things like that, great example. Ben Steger wrote a book. Okay. What you do is you look up, if your goal is to shoot straight, right? You look at the books that are written by grandmaster level handgun shooters, as a for instance, right? Because they're going to actually tell you about it, right? If you want to learn how to shoot a rifle really straight, really far, Todd Hodnett has written a book, right? Out at Accuracy First.
Yep.
Right? You want to learn how to hit a Coke can at 1,000? That's the guy. Or how to get 308 to actually reach a dude-sized target at 1 mile. Because the math has to be really friggin' good. Plus some stars got to align a little bit, not my point. Right? You need to go find things to read about, and these same sources will always have places that you can go as far as how, or like white papers that are written up on individual performance of certain things, all kinds of stuff like that. Generally speaking, and just being straight on this, as a guy that runs a YouTube channel and a training company, right? The YouTubers are really good at getting you to see the thing, right? It's like, okay, that's how that battery tray is actually loaded, right? Or occasionally you got some solid reviewers that'll actually punch a bunch of rounds through a particular thing and be like, all right, here's this 32-minute autistic rant on this screw I don't like, right? But as far as shooting really, really straight, if you don't have access to like a trainer and you want to know where to go, the very last place you should go is influencer land, right? And I say this believing that I put out, as far as my little lane, some of the very best videos on those subjects, right? Like, I say that as a guy that believes in his bones he has the very best EOTech EXPS3 video on the site. But just being truthful, I know I am an atom. I am an atom in an ocean of bullshito. Right? There are tons of people that are out there. And what is far more likely to happen is that if you start looking at like the YouTuber space, you will get lost in nonsense that I have to undo later.
Yeah, I can see that.
Because, and that, like, it's not their fault. It's not their fault. But I absolutely see products of what the screens are showing them all the time.
I bet.
All the time. And it's not their fault. They're doing their best. They're just trying to go to sources that'll help them and things like that. Still, I have to undo those things all the time, right? Because who on the planet Earth actually bought an FAL charging handle for their AR if it weren't for just influencer trash?
Yeah, I guess that's true.
Well, you see what I mean?
And honestly, just from like a personal experience, one of the things that I've kind of noticed for myself is by watching training content, and like when I say that, I say it kind of loosely, right? Like watching more of like the gun entertainment that portrays itself as training content. As someone who likes to go out and shoot, it puts you in this position, this mindset of this like necessary level of performance that isn't necessarily achievable by the average person who still has a life to live outside of the range. And you get this idea that like you're not going to be able to meet these fundamentals. You're not capable of these, these times or these draw speeds or whatever it might be. And you have this idea that you're going to die in the streets because you can't meet those expectations. And I feel like that could be detrimental to a degree because like I've felt it myself in the past where I'm like, I'm never going to be able to, bust out this drill the way that these guys can. So what am I even doing at this point? Right.
Right. So standards, right? Number one, if your idea of standards has nothing to do, well, let me phrase this correctly. If your idea of standards does not include quantifiable metrics, you're almost wasting your time. Almost.
Yeah.
Because you don't actually know if you're getting better.
Right.
You don't actually know what certain periods of time actually are. Because for instance, if I were to just say, to open air space, right? That, hey, what's absolutely achievable and that should be done is from concealed. If you were to put yourself under a metric that hones a lot of different skills at once, it's not just a reload itself. But let's say that it is, in fact, a concealed one reload one, just as a for instance. And I would just say this on the internet. Yeah, get that done in 4 seconds. That sounds to the wider world like it's very, very simple. It's almost too simple, in fact, right? It's not. It's not for average folks. It's not for people that haven't deliberately trained very specifically under quantifiable metrics. And you can tell very quickly that for most, in fact, it's impossible. Now, I bring up the reload specifically for this because, generally speaking, that is a known condition where you have a problem with the handgun, as a for instance, right? Versus any sort of condition where you don't have any idea what's about to happen to the gun and then what happens. So good metrics to follow, at least to me, are scalable to the individual's skill level. There's a base standard, but then we scale it. So as a for instance, like I have something that I believe is very appropriately named the gauge. And I'm not the only person on planet Earth that's ever put up a scoring standard. I am one of a great many, right? And sticking with the handgun stuff, right? We start at 25, USPSA cardboard target. You have your A zone in the chest, and there's point values that you start with, and anything that doesn't land in the pre-prescribed zone is, it starts taking points away from you. You can come in overtime from a bunch of different stuff. it's got all these little mathy metrics and stuff that takes away from your possible 200 points, as for instance. Then drill 1, right? Again, just to the wider group that's listening to this, if I were to say, hey, from the draw, and these standards are all from concealed, and I don't care what you use, actually. So this could be with a gun belt on, whatever. I don't care. From the draw, 10 rounds, 8 seconds. Right? Sounds fair enough, I guess.
Achievable, yeah.
15 yards, 1 round in 2 seconds, 3 reps. And again, this is the base standard for it. And then we go to 5 yards, right? From the draw, 5 and 2. That would be the whole friggin' USPSA head in 3.6. Sounds reasonable. And then we back up to the 25 again, right? So this is phase 2. And it's from the draw, one-handed only, 5 rounds. Switch to the non-dominant hand, 5 rounds. You have 14 seconds. Sounds reasonable. And then we go to the 10-yard line, and it's 1 reload 1, 5 reps of that. Because you can get lucky and get a good reload in one time, but now are you consistent? That sort of thing. And we don't do mulligans. We don't do do-overs, none of that stuff. So if you didn't check your gear, that's your fault. And occasionally you just get a little bit unlucky, focus and salvage what happened here, right?
Yeah.
So that sounds totally fine, right? It's shoot, that might be too easy, in fact, right? And it regularly beats the brakes off of people. It regularly beats the brakes off of people. So then, okay, well, at least we have a metric to start with, right? Because these are all achievable standards for sure. And it's something to look at and reach that is achievable, that isn't an impossible standard, would be 80% of this. So a 160 and up, as a for instance, right? And of course, there's a million different penalties that take points away, but that's not my point. Point is that you start with achievable metrics, and then you start doing dickish things to yourself to start taking more points away.
Yeah, add the masochism.
Right. Where like the base level standard for a miss is 5 points each, right? Okay, you get to a certain point where that miss being 20 points now hurts you in the same way as the 5-point misses would, right?
Yeah.
So your first gauge ever is like a 100 flat or whatever it is, and then a really advanced, super dickish thing that you're doing to yourself sort of gauge, you still end up at that 100. Point is that like you're at that incline while feeling the same amount of pressure, and now I don't have to worry about looking at impossible standards.
Yeah. So that makes a lot of sense. So you can scale it based on skill level.
Yeah, quantifiable metrics and scalability. That's all this is. That and buy a friggin' shot timer is the most valuable $150 you're ever going to spend.
Yeah. No, the shot timer thing, it took me a long time to get one because of the cost, but It makes a huge difference. You know what I mean?
One of those with what it gives you as far as scalability. And man, if you have friends that are dicks, right? Like, that adds pressure too, because like if you and I are doing stuff on a range and you know we're peers, right? I still want to hear you. I don't want to hear you talking to me. I don't want to hear you I don't want to hear you talking all that trash behind me. So I'm here to just beat the brakes off you now, right? Like just that little bit of pressure, even if it's a known course, and if it's not a known course, even, right? Because then you can just start setting things up for each other or have somebody else do it, right? You know, like a competition. Weird. But point is that buying that shot timer right there, you'll figure out with what it can bring to the table besides what do my splits look like, which is such a tiny part of it. Almost an insignificant part, honestly. Almost. Starts to be valid later on. But buying that shot timer by itself is more valuable than 10,000 rounds without it, at least.
I can see that. Because you actually have something to measure your improvement.
And based off the development process for lots of folks, including myself, by the way, I am talented at nothing. So I need more. I need more reps than less. A shot timer for me is more valuable than like 50,000 rounds. And that, if I'm exaggerating, I'm under exaggerating it. Right.
Yeah.
Like that's the, whatever the opposite, the hyperbolic is.
Try to stay underneath, yeah, just in case. Don't oversell it.
Well, I mean, because frankly, it's probably significantly more if we're talking about how important it actually is.
Yeah. Yeah, and I did see somebody ask, shot timer recommendation. I just use the packed club timer. I know it's one of the most common, but I don't think it really matters as long as you get a decent one.
Chat can help me out with this. I don't remember. It's been a real long while now. The blue one that's on Amazon, the generic friggin' blue one that gives you the whole shot set in there, and you can adjust like time of day and junk. Like
Isn't that
I don't
one like international something or other?
know.
I can't remember now.
I don't remember the other generic shot timer sound that isn't the packed.
Yeah, and the packed, man, that thing is expensive. And I'll tell you what, they definitely need to do a little extra work on those battery connections, if you ask me.
I will notice that about the one I'm talking about. It has a tendency to be just a little bit more weatherproof, which is why I just kept on with it. Right.
The one you're talking about is the Pro Timer BT, I believe.
There you go. Yeah. Fantastic.
So
but either way though, right? It starts raining and you start busting out the sandwich bags regardless.
Yeah, there you go. I did get a couple super chats in here. I just want to bust out real quick. We got Airborne Veteran Random once again, which let me go ahead and pull that up real quick if I can find it. Chat's been flying by since that showed up. Okay, so I still have my OEF LBE 9 mag loadout support gear. It's a tactical tailor system. Yes, I paid for it out of pocket. Is that still a good system? I'm thinking of upgrading. My take on that kind of stuff is if it's a good system for you, then it's a good system. But I don't know. What do you think about that one, Chris?
You still fast roping, man? Like that's legit a question, right? Because the fold over stuff and that sort of thing. If you're not fast roping, the other reason to protect that sort of stuff is reconnaissance a legit thing that you actually do, right? Do you go on really long range patrols? That sort of stuff, because it's not just protecting it from falling out. It's magazines are friggin' shiny, man. They're fantastic targets. They really are, because they're big, they're square, and you can see them from a real long way away, right? So sometimes I want to delete a little bit of the shiny junk that's on my chest, right? Because sunlight hits magazines, right? All of them are shiny in some capacity, right? Just thoughts like that, right? If that is not remotely a concern, okay, having a single trip row of tacos up front is pretty great, because when I go start reaching for them, they give just a little bit, but I can also make them nice and tight so that they don't yard sale when I do stupid things with dudes. Just stuff like that. It really does vary based off of what you're trying to do, right? Because if I'm going in and out of houses, absolutely not. The tactical tailor stuff is a hard no for me, right? But if I'm going to be living out in the woods for a really long time, and I know I'm going to be doing a lot of foot-based stuff, right? Because look, dude, even in conventional engineer units, as a for instance, we have reconnaissance platoons. I've been in a bunch of them. The needs change. So, yeah, that's a really long way of saying I don't friggin' know. What are you doing right now?
I think that's how it works, though, right? It depends on what you're using it for. Nobody wants to hear that, but that's generally the answer, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And then I also had Avocado Atrocity came in with the lady goes first, highest likelihood to win, which was based on our home defense conversation. So, so they know how their home life is going to play out, I assume. So
that's fair.
Yeah. Whatever strategy is going to work best for you, So listen, I know we're about to be at a 2-hour mark, so I think that's can get a little bit crazy, right? We do have a couple of guys who had some questions, and I just wanted to kind of open it up for a little Q&A here at the end, just to kind of give people that opportunity. One question came in from Red Dawn Readiness saying, what do you think about the skyscraper mounts or like the Hydra mounts or things like that? Like what's like the really tall mounts? Is there any particular thing that you consider about them in the sense of them being good or bad or whatever it may be?
The Hydra mount is, my opinion, The Hydra mount is good for exactly one firearm, and that firearm is pretty butt, and that would be an MP7 because it accommodates all the nonsense that you require, but there's no room on it, right? And the MP7 is pretty ass. So, and look, I just got really, really used to lower 1/3 like EOTechs or aim points or whatever, right? So if I have to go passive, it doesn't necessarily bother me. And the taller the mount is, you start running into a series of issues, and it doesn't just have to deal with shooting through portholes and stuff either. It's at a certain point, right? You're zeroed for a particular distance, right? So your optic, more or less, let's say you're zeroed for 300 instead of just straight line of sight. You're compensating for bullet drop, then the bullet drops, right? But let's say that we have a really, really weird position that we're in, and now we're turned sideways. So now I have the angle going this way, right? Because I'm zeroed for that particular line of sight, but at that distance, but the bullet still does that. The higher your optic is, the worse that is.
Yep.
As a for instance, right? So generally speaking, I'm not the biggest fan of super tall dots. They have their place, especially once your night vision starts to get bigger. And they have their place when they're riding on top of things, right? So I am the biggest simp for ACOGs, and I really like the TAO2. Like,
yeah,
I'm going to release a video on it this coming weekend, right? But, or, magnification, right? We're not just talking LPVOs. Let's say that we're trying to play at higher magnification. Pick the word you want to use, sniper or special purpose rifle, golf, but for men, whatever it is that you want to do. Tall dots do have their place, and a lot of times with these guns that have higher magnification, it has nothing to do with shooting up close with it either. Like, as for instance, a way to just keep stuff dialed up to max power a whole lot is to use that top dot as a reference.
Right.
I see the teeny tiny thing way over there, cover it with the dot, jump right back onto the giant magnification, and we're good. Like, I didn't lose him, can't lose him. It's right there. Right. So they certainly have their
place.
People
do spotting scopes all the time.
Yeah. I mean, there you go, right? Yeah, there's a lot of 1913 sections on a lot of spotting scopes and stuff there too. So they have their place. But if I'm going to run it dedicated, why? A lot of things that I've heard before where it's like, oh, I can get nice and upright. Sure, you're a little more comfortable, right? My first job ever doing a green suit thing was as a paratrooper length 249 guy. Right, so just a short 249, and you carry that thing around with optics, a PEG 15, a light, and a Cabela's shipment on your chest. Right. This is not that uncomfortable for me as a thought, right? Because if you're squared up the way that you should with your shoulder and your collarbone and your pec and that sort of thing, and and you're almost trying to mimic a friggin' handgun grip, but with you and then the contact points on the gun and that sort of stuff, how super tall or super low you get doesn't really matter all that much, at least not in my estimation. And I got a friggin' giraffe neck, so I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't need it super tall to get it done.
I'm in giraffe territory as well, so I understand. Okay, and then let's see. I did see a couple other questions come in. Now, Hustle Bones wants to know, what's the single most important drill you would recommend them focus on?
I'm sorry, what? I was reading the chat too. What?
No, you're good. They want to know, what's the single most important drill that they should focus on?
Christ. Doubles. Whether it's a draw or with the gun already out. The pertaining to especially handguns and especially handguns with a dot on them, doubles. You need to know how you are influencing that gun as it's moving. You need to know how you are influencing that gun before and after it comes to a standstill. You need to know if your grip is surviving the recoil impulse or if you're constantly having to like milk it. And then you want to add a draw. So if there's like one drill I could do for the rest of my life, doubles. There's other things obviously that you should do. But if I could only pick one, and you really friggin' shouldn't, but let's say that I could only pick one, probably doubles.
Reasonable. And I think that's what they were hoping to hear. So it looks like they're happy about it. Let's see here. And then we did also get another super chat. And the question is, what are the fail points you see in the Hellcat?
Those magazines are trash.
Concerned about it, so.
Yep, those magazines are trash.
Magazines?
Just like the XDM. Just like the XDM. Only mildly less worse because everything is compressed a little bit more. But those magazines are bad. They're like Canik magazines are terrible. And yes, if you own a Canik, yes, those magazines are horrific. The second that stuff gets in them, they stop working. Don't argue with me. Because
you would know, I don't. So
I've seen, well, and that's the thing. I've seen that in like Tennessee clay. I've seen that in Florida sugar sand. I've seen that in any environment where the ground particles come loose, right?
Yeah.
You know, those three things may as well be considered the same.
Well, and I haven't actually owned a Canik, and I've only had a limited experience with a Hellcat. But I could see that being the issue only because magazines are often like the number one failure point, right? Like if you have bad mags, it doesn't matter how good the gun is.
Yeah, and if we're talking magazines, right, the reason why Glock has the reputation it does isn't even because of the handgun itself. Yeah, good handgun. I can take it apart with a ballpoint pen, just wiggle some stuff, and use a roll of duct tape to set it all on. Those magazines are the very best auto-loading pistol magazines on the planet. That's why it has the reputation it does. Because I have magazines, and again, I shoot a bit. I have magazines that are 10 years old, and they're still running just fine. Occasionally, I'll get a failure to lock to the rear, but if that's the only thing I got, you know.
Well, and it's interesting because, you know, people will immediately jump to grab Metgar magazines, which haven't been proven yet, to get one additional round of capacity. And I just feel like, why? I just thought my Glock mags work well, you know?
Why mess with the literal best formula for magazines ever? Right.
I'll tell you this. I recently saw a video. I'm not going to say whose, but the video was it was about the new Metgar mags. And in the video, they said, and let's be honest, you know, Glock mags aren't even that good. And I didn't know what to say to that. As a first
we hold these truths to be self-evident. You do not shoot a lot. I'm sorry, right? But these are also the same guys that say that Glock magazines don't drop free. It's like just push the button, they come out.
Yeah.
And if they stick, they'll stick under sets of circumstances that all of them stick. Strip them out.
Yep. Yeah,
Jesus
I've had
Christ.
mags stick from just about every gun I owned. So just depending on what's going on.
Yeah, like just as a for instance, I am a huge Beretta simp, right? As far as like M9s and stuff like that. Those magazines are good. They are infinitely worse than Glock magazines. Somebody made a comment about the USP. I'll give you that. USP magazines they're pretty good. Magazines are pretty good. Like I would probably put them at second place, honestly. Like those magazines in combination with the double wide trailer that's cycling back toward your face, that's a reliable friggin' pistol.
Well, you know, I mean, you can't go wrong with a double wide. So, and I'll say this: I spoke to a friend of mine who was involved with developments around the M9A4, and one thing that I learned from them was that the magazines do require maintenance and additional cleaning than you might have in other firearms because of the way the gun works. And
Yep.
if you allow that fouling and oil and everything else to get back into the magazine over time, you're going to have, issues, especially in extreme environments. So, and
Yep.
that's, and I reached out because I was having a couple of spring related issues in the extreme cold and in snow. And,
Yep.
you know,
Yeah. Your 10,000 round maintenance cycle, you should probably rip those magazines apart too, is typically what I've heard.
yeah. Yeah. But that's, one of the most interesting things too is, we should never maintain things or clean them or anything, right? So,
What a stupid trend that is, isn't it?
yeah.
Eh,
From
You
my
know what? And I,
perspective.
I believe I know where the source of this was. Do you remember Filthy 14?
Yeah,
I
I
think
do.
that is where that started, where it suddenly got cool to just never take care of equipment ever again.
Yeah, see, there's a difference between testing something to find out where the threshold is versus owning something that you want to rely on for self-defense, you know?
It's like you could only imagine the inside of this guy's house,
Yeah, right.
right? So, I mean,
Well,
I mean,
I know we're at the 2 hour mark, and I do have a private live stream after this, which usually the members and Subscribe Star members come in and hang out for a little bit. And I told them it might go late tonight, so we'll see if anybody actually sticks around for that or not. But look, I really appreciate you coming on and answering these questions. I know the topics just kind of go all over the place, just based on feedback from the live chat as well as where the rants take us to. But I find the information very valuable, and I really appreciate you always kind of sharing that personal experience in a transparent way without the influence of of marketing getting behind you and kind of forcing your hand, I guess, right? Not that you would do that, but I'm just saying that it is a breath of fresh air from time to time when we're used to what we usually experience, right?
yeah, I mean, good Lord, how do I say this next? The simplest way to go about it is, you know what? Aaron Cowan put this better than I did. I'm a schoolhouse that happens to have a YouTube channel.
There you go.
Right. If I want to stay relevant, right, you're sort of not allowed to reject modernity, right? You have to investigate it, and you have to see what is indeed better. In so doing that, right, you're going to discover a lot of different things about a lot of different pieces of equipment and stuff like that.
Yep.
I do this YouTube thing, and I do the teaching thing and that sort of thing because I recognize that they're trusting you enough to pay you for information. Which means, right, recommendations that I make at one point or another, someplace, it's going into combat. So it's either in some faraway land someplace, or it's on the street with some guy, or it's just some line cook trying to get home, right? So you probably better thoroughly investigate what it is that you're looking at. And you should probably know a little bit more about an optics package than to sit there and stare at it and list the things that you can read off a box, as a for instance.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I'll tell you what, even just from my own experience, being honest about gear not working properly or not passing the litmus test will definitely limit opportunities. And so you do sacrifice some level of potential opportunity in the future by telling the truth. So it is something that you have to kind of stick to and be willing to do.
Yeah, if I had a nickel.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I know. And it is what it is, but there's something more important than, financial reward when it comes to, like you said, people relying on you and trusting you for that advice, especially when it comes to life-saving equipment. And it's like you said, it's kind of like why you ban the P320 at your range, because you just don't want to, take the additional risk if it's not necessary. So
There's also something to be said about just not having that much pride of authorship. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Just go where the data goes. It's easy that way.
yeah, remove the ego, makes it a lot easier.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say I don't have ego. I have an ego 1.25 miles wide.
Oh yeah.
Right. But it's only because I'm proud of the process.
Well, you're a guy on YouTube, so your ego must be, through the roof, right?
Yeah. And you know what? I'm not going to make that joke. I don't want to tank this stream. But
Fair enough.
yeah.
All right.
Yes.
Well, we'll go ahead and,
Something Chris Hansen episodes, things like that.
yeah, that's
That's
perfect.
where YouTubers inevitably end up, I suppose, huh?
Yeah, or they, start buying clothes in a different section of the store. So it's
Crazy.
whatever works. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. But like I said, I really appreciate you coming on, Chris. And make sure you check out his channel, Regular Guy Training LLC. It's in the description down below, and it's also been posted in the live chat multiple times. So, maybe in the future we can do something like this again, or maybe I'll be able to actually make it to one of your classes one of these days because I definitely need it. So, but regardless, I definitely appreciate your time and just want to say thanks.
Well, I appreciate it, man. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, of course. All right, everybody, that's it. Enjoy the rest of your night because it's going late.